Hi there, friends. I'm Vasco. I'm part of the team behind the first global Scrum Master Summit. If you're a Scrum Master, the Scrum Master Summit is a place to learn, to share, and to meet new friends. We will have lots of live sessions where you can meet and network with other Scrum Masters from all over the globe. So make sure you check it at bit.ly/SM Summit and the numeral 21. That's bit.ly/SMSUMMIT21. We have 7 amazing keynotes or more, as we are still organizing the conference as I record this, and 8 tracks that feature people like you and thought leaders sharing their insights and knowledge to help you become an awesome Scrum Master. So once again, check it out at bit.ly/SM Summit 21. That's all lowercase, all one word, SM Summit and the numeral 21. I'll see you on the virtual conference floor. All right, now on to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And today, joining us from a very special town in the UK, in the UK, is Rob Cooper. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Vasco. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So Rob is a lead agile coach at Sainsbury's who wants to focus on how the whole business uses agility. So Rob, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Yeah, so I've been working in IT for, I suppose, last 20 years or so. I started life as a project manager. And I had a particular role maybe about 10 years ago, which they recruited me as a project manager, but actually then they wanted to train me into a Scrum Master. It's a small software house. And it's a really kind of interesting time. And, you know, I went on the Scrum training, did my CSM, and then I was like, great, I was good to go. I knew everything, straight into the organization. And of course, I knew nothing. But it was an interesting introduction into what Scrum Mastering, what Agile really is.
Absolutely. So as you started, I'm sure as many of us get started in that position and even that transition, like I did from project manager to Scrum Master, there are, of course, some moments where things don't really go as we expect them. So today's Monday and we want to dive into one of those moments. So Rob, share with us a story of a moment where you as a Scrum Master, you did your best, but at that time, like so many times it happens, the best just wasn't good enough. So walk us through that story. We'll dive into the insights and learnings later, but walk us through that story, Rob.
I said I'd become newly qualified CSM, and I had all this head full of theory, and it's still fairly new into the role. And so this just to give a little bit of context, this software house, they had one main software product that they made, and there was three or so software teams all working on this one product and different aspects of it. And so they had a kind of a very, very early stage Scrum setup, and it sort of worked fine. But I guess they were stuck pretty much halfway between Scrum and a waterfall methodology that they've used for their sort of previous sort of 5 or 10 years before that.
How did that look like, this being stuck halfway between Scrum and waterfall?
Well, okay, let me give you an example. So they had the teams, they were working in sprints, various 2, 3, 4 week sprints, which might vary. But the real kind of telling thing was around the release cycle. So the release cycle of this product was on a 6-month cycle. So
that is waterfall if I've ever heard anything.
Exactly. So and there's a sort of a telling thing, and the way that they approached quality at that point. So what they did was they'd actually develop for 13 weeks, and then they would test for another 13 weeks solid, and then they would release. Now they knew this wasn't ideal, and that was at that point in time. But to me that really sort of outlines a classic sort of, that's where they were stuck between an old waterfall testing in quality.
Did they have the testers also in a separate team, or like how could they even survive the idea of having development and testing so separate that they would take separate 13-week periods?
They they did have a separate testing team, and the kind of the ebb and flow of it was that the testers would do some testing during the development 13-week period. But then they would try and get the developers to go and start doing testing, much more testing roles. And of course, that never works. Developers, that was never happening. The developers would never really fully get into testing, and so they didn't have
Probably
to
didn't
unit
like
test.
it either.
Oh, no, they hated it absolutely, and so it was a very, very kind of tough situation, and it was a creation of just slogging through 6,000 pretty much manual tests. And again, they were sort of, they knew they needed to change, but that was the situation at that point.
How did you come into this story then, Rob?
So the in terms of kind of failure, actually, it's a slightly different tack to the areas I was looking at, because what I was tasked with was actually looking at predictability. Now, in one sense, they had a predictability because they had this sort of fairly fixed cycle, 6-month cycle, that they would try and do releases within. The problem was, though, that they would never be able to hit those dates. So they, management would say, right, well, we're going to release on, 1st of July and 1st of whatever. But it never really worked that easily. And so they're saying, oh, well, look, we really want to get predictability. So Rob, Scrum Master, how can we get, we want to be more predictable about when we're going to release. Now, again, because of, I suppose, my sort of, early day Scrum Master thinking was like, well, burn down charts. There we go. We can do burn down charts. That will solve our problem, because I was sort of pulling straight from the playbook, which, in retrospect, I find that's what you would do. But I suppose, well, okay, let's go through. So yeah, so I got my my burn down charts, and I was aggregated all the data together to look at when we would, when we should be able to complete, ready for going into the testing and so forth. And of course, my brilliant predictions were a complete failure. They bore no resemblance to reality, and probably they were even worse than actually just having no prediction whatsoever. And I suppose that was the first wake-up call of many, where I realized that creating software involves a number of very complex systems and a lot of people working together to try and ultimately deliver the value for the customer. But that you can't just sort of easily abstract one piece and assume there's a lot of predictability. So what I had in my mind was still project management thinking you can predict this. You just do the numbers and out will pop the answer. And of course, that's nothing to be further.
So I totally see that. In fact, I would say, being a project manager myself, like, we are taught to look at it's not burn down, but earn value curve, or whatever methodology we might be using, the Gantt chart, and use estimates and so on, and try to get some kind of predictability. But one of the things that you mentioned at the start of this story kind of reminds me of one of the critical, say, causes for lack of predictability in software development, which is the separation of development and testing, right? Because when do you find the real problems? It's when you're actually testing the software from a customer's perspective. This is when you find the gaps, the things that weren't written in the requirements, that are visible only when you have the system up and running. And then, of course, sometimes those need to go all the way back to design, which creates loads of work suddenly after you've already spent all of your development time, right? Like in the old project management world, we had this very clear separation between analysis, requirements, design, development, testing. And when you found problems in testing, inevitably, some of those went all the way back to analysis errors. And then you needed to rethink, like, how are we going to do this? And, reshape everything, and very often even come up with, kludgy answers or solutions that would make it harder for the user, because we were running out of time, right? So for me, from this story, kind of the key takeaway is, it doesn't really matter what we do in what used to be called development phase, because as long as you separate the test out, you're going to find the most important information about problems at the end, which is when you don't want to have surprises, should you want predictability, right? Because surprises at the start of the project are easy to handle. Surprises at the end of the project are very hard to handle. And as long as we separate these two, predictability can never come about, no matter whatever metrics we might be looking at. Kind of that's my takeaway and from my experience. How about you, Rob? What do you want the listeners to take as the biggest takeaway from this story?
Yeah, I think the point you make is a great one, and so that's why short iterative cycles to expose whatever weaknesses you might find for whatever reason, whatever systemic reason, absolutely critical to over the longer term achieving a better sense of predictability. But I think also it's awareness of kind of the bigger picture, because there were other things that actually around the story of interactions from management or interference from management, which were unpredictable, the way that the product owners would be interacting with the teams and sort of taking the product on a particular direction. Those are also, I suppose, there were kind of curveballs that put things off track, but also they didn't need to. I mean, there's always unpredictability in the system, but I think you can mitigate against that. You can make life a little bit easier for yourself, again, by sort of transparency and close collaboration. But yeah, from a surfacing issues within your software from point of view, I think your point is well made.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. Like, there's so many things that bring unpredictability to the system. And unless we find those out, there's very little we will be able to do about it. And certainly measuring a volatile system is not going to give you much information, right? It's like using the noise instead of the signal to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if I could go back and I could sort of speak to my earlier Scrum Master self, I think what I'd be saying is to sort of pull back the lens a little bit, because I had quite a dialed-in lens and and I would say, so one hand is pull back the lens, get yourself a wider picture of what's going on in the company, and spend some time reflecting on that and thinking, okay, let's try and get some understanding as to where the main sources of unpredictability are.
Absolutely. And great point. Thank you for sharing that story, Rob.
Welcome.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.